Okay, I'm going to show you the film again, so that's all right. Yep, so that was it. King Charles hiding in the oak tree after the Battle of Worcester. So I thought I'd say a little bit about. Can you still sing everything okay?
Yep, just about.
Yep, jolly good. Yep, right. So here we are. The English Civil War, 1442 to 1642 to 1651, is in fact a series of civil wars between the Roundheads and the Cavaliers. The primary focus of the conflict was the manner of England's governance and the role of the monarchy, but there was also a wider war between called the Wars of the Three Kingdoms, which involved essentially England against Scotland and Ireland. The Battle of Worcester was the last major engagement of the conflict, and it ended with Charles I, the son of Charles I, what many people thought was the proper Charles II, on the run, fleeing for his life. Now, the differing characteristics of the opposing groups are really illustrated in this drawing. So on one hand, we got the Cavaliers, the aristocracy, who were elitist, fun-loving, rich, privileged, careless, brave, self-centered, and perhaps irresponsible. And on the other hand, we had the Roundheads, who were careful, serious, egalitarian, puritanical, principled, unimaginative, perhaps rather dull. And I think these characteristics can still be traced in modern political figures. For instance, I think that's very much the type of conflict we were looking at in those days. Now the Battle of Worcester itself, which is really where the story starts, this was the second phase of the Civil War. It ended with the execution of Charles I, a very famous event in 1649. The Commonwealth had been established, and Oliver Cromwell himself had been confirmed as the main power in the land. The young Charles Stuart still claimed the throne. He still had his monarchist ambitions. And pursuing these, he landed in Scotland in June 1650. And in January 1651, he was proclaimed king in Edinburgh. It was the last coronation, in fact, to take place in Scotland. But that was in direct opposition to the English Parliament, so they were obviously on a massive collision course. And that was what the Third Civil War was all about. Charles invaded England. He headed south, hoping to ignite an uprising as he went. When he was denied entry in Shrewsbury, he headed for Worcester, which was now a royalist city, and he knew he'd find a lot of sympathisers there. And he was also close to Wales, and he hoped that a lot of his supporters could be recruited from there. As he approached Worcester, he was in parliamentary hands. It was garrisoned by about 500 parliamentary forces. But their tactic was essentially to abandon the city, allow the royalists to congregate there and take the city, and then for the parliamentarians themselves to lay siege to it. So that's essentially what happened. The royalists entered on 23rd of August. They refortified the city. They built a big earthwork bastion, which you can still see, called Fort Royal. But within 5 days of securing the city, parliamentarians converged on it. By 28th of August, eastern approaches had all been blockaded, and the parliamentary troops were in a position to attack. They didn't do this until they got all their troops there, and that was on the 3rd of September, 1651. And they essentially overran the city. They overran the royalists. The new model army of Cromwell was more professional, better organised. They overran the royalist troops. Charles himself had watched from the tower of Worcester Cathedral, which you can see in the background of this painting towards the top right-hand corner. When everything went wrong, he came down from the tower. He took refuge at his lodging house, which you see here. You can still see this today. It's a pub now called the King Charles Inn. But in the bottom left-hand corner, he went there and he escaped via the back door as the soldiers were entering by the front. He then made his way out of the city on horseback, met some 60 of his officers, and at that point, really, the future of the English monarchy was hanging by a thread. If Charles was captured, he would have been executed. But if he could escape, then the hopes and prayers that he had for a restoration could yet live on. And so that little drawing on the right is the start of the escape, really. And on the left, you get a picture of just how young the king was. I think he was about 21 at the time. So he was a very young man indeed, with facing an awesome task in front of him. Now, take an overview here of of the way the route worked. So around about the middle, there's Worcester. Initially, he headed north. There was an attempt to escape via Wales. He had in mind that didn't work, and then he was heading south down to Charmouth near Lyme Regis, and then the big plan was to head east and escape from the southeast coast. That broadly is his route, and this is how I came across it. Essentially, this is the Monarch's Way. If you do a lot of walking in this country, then you will come across Monarch's Way signs very quickly. I noticed many of the routes I did, you just seem to come across them at random, in the Midlands maybe, or in the Cotswolds, on the South Downs, near Salisbury, on the coastal path. Before I researched it, I just couldn't imagine what type of route this was. It seemed to be absolutely everywhere, and but that's the way it followed. Yeah, with a group of us, we were looking for a walk to do about 4.5 years ago, and I suggested this, and we settled on it, and since then we've been walking for about 4 years. We're about 3/4 of the way through. It's a big task, obviously, but it's hugely enjoyable. There's no other walk in the country that's got such variety of landscapes that you pass through. Other walks like the Cotswold Way or indeed the Mendip Way, they concentrate on one landscape, but this just brings in so much. It's really endlessly fascinating. And this is a bit of evidence that we've been doing it. These are the various photographs we've taken as we've passed along the route of the. There's basically 4 of us as the core. Other people join on from time to time. So we're around about here at present. Not too far from, say, Salisbury, something maybe 2 or 3 days from Salisbury. We were hoping to do that this year and next year, but not going to be much done this year, I'm afraid. We just hope for next year. So getting back to the escape itself, we left Charles leaving Worcester. On the right's a statue you'll find in Worcester today, which commemorates the event. See, that's just at the back of the lodging house we saw earlier. Now, initially he had a large band, that we said, of 60 supporters. He thinned this out very quickly. I think he realised that the less people he got helping him, the more chance he had to conceal himself. And in fact, only 2 supporters were to stay with him throughout. One was this character on the left, Lord Wilmot. He appears to be an archetypal cavalier. He was brave to the point of recklessness. He was resourceful, cunning, and loyal. Well, at least he was when it suited him. And the other person that stayed with him throughout was Wilmot's servant, a guy known as Swan. Now, I sometimes think of them a bit like this. So, on the left, the young king. On the right, The woe-begotten servant in the middle, and the cunning lieutenant on the right. Now they immediately after fleeing, the plan was formed to escape to France via Wales. Now, one of the initial parties, a chap called Lord Derby, he was a prominent Catholic nobleman, and he had sheltered at Boscombe House in Shropshire, the Brentwood Forest area, which was a Catholic enclave with royalist sympathies, and several safe houses that had been made available to royalists through the Civil War. The owner of Boscombe was Charles Gifford, and he was also with the group, and he suggested another of his houses in the same area, which was White Ladies Priory, and that's the ruins today on the right. This was a former monastery that had been converted into residential houses after the Reformation. He said this was the safest option because it was so remote. And this is where Charles headed. He arrived there on the 4th of September, that's the day after the battle, in the very early hours of the morning. He received a welcome from one of 5 brothers, Richard Penderell, who became very famous because of their role in the escape. He spent the next day, that's the 4th of September, hiding in a wood nearby known as Spring Coppice. And at dusk, he and Richard Penderell walked several miles to a village called Madeley, which is near modern-day Ironbridge. So that's where they got to. They tried to cross the River Severn, but it was patrolled by government troops. So that plan was aborted. They had to hide in a barn all day on the 5th of September, and then on the 6th of September, or on the night of the 5th and 6th of September, they walked back. This time to Boscombe House, which is possibly the most famous location of the walk. On the right, you see the house today, and in the foreground, there's that rather woe-begotten tree is a descendant of the royal oak, where Charles hid throughout the 6th of September in the most famous incident, and one which gave its name to several thousand pubs. That's the descendant of the tree. The Wales plan, though, they decided was dead in the water. They couldn't even cross the Severn. So Charles carried on hiding in the area for another few days. Eventually, a new plan emerged, and that was to escape from Bristol. And so this is when Charles heads down towards the southwest. This is where they headed to, a place called Norton Court in a village of. It was the manor house of Abbotsleigh, which is near Bristol, just over the river from Bristol, not far, in fact, from the Clifton Suspension Bridge. The cover story for this journey was that Charles, he was disguised as manservant to Jane Lane, who was one of the supporters he'd met while hiding near Boscombe, and she was supposed to be visiting a friend of hers who was expecting a baby, and they were accompanied by another supporter called Henry Lascelles. So they arrived here on 12th of September. Now, one of the amazing things about this route is that nearly every building that Charles started has survived to this day in some form or other, but this is an exception. Norton Court has been long since demolished. Not much is known of it. I asked the local history society what they could tell me about it, and the answer was not very much at all. But I did ferret around. I made a special trip to see what was there, and the picture in the centre is not all there is. There's some remnants of the formal gardens and that square building's known as the gazebo, and there's 1 or 2 remnants of an ornamental lake as well. But what does commemorate the escape in the area is this memorial stone in the local church, in which is to Sir George Norton, who was proprietor of Norton Court, and the memorial stone praises greatly his role in the escape and his bravery, which is completely undeserved because he never penetrated Charles's identity. He didn't know who he was, so he deserves very little credit at all. The man who does deserve credit is Norton's butler. There's a chap called Pope who recognised the king and identified himself to him and promised him his loyalty. And it was this butler, Mr. Pope, who spent his time trying to arrange a ship for Charles from Bristol. However, there was nothing doing in that direction. the news was that he would have to wait at least another month before anything was sailing for France. So that the Bristol plan was abandoned. That's the second plan that had failed to work out. So what Pope came up with was a suggestion that it should move further south to a family called the Wyndhams, who were devoted royalists, who lives 40 or 50 miles away in the village of Trent. That's on the border between Somerset and Dorset. I think Trent's been in both counties at different times. So and that is where they and that is where the Mendip crossing came in, really. What happened at Norton Court was on 15th of September, which is the day before they decided to leave. Mrs. Norton, who was the friend that they were visiting, she gave birth sadly to a stillborn child, and it made it awkward for Jane Lane to leave. So, but to overcome that difficulty, a letter was forged saying that Jane Lane's father was ill and they would all have to return to the West Midlands. So on that subterfuge, the party made its getaway. They were heading for Trent over the Mendips with a plan to spend the night on the way at Castle Carey. And this is where the Mendip journey came in. There was a book written in 1897 called The Flight of the King by Alan Fay, and he sadly said this is our best source for much of the research of this of the journey that took place. But sadly, he says that not much was recorded of the journey through Somerset. So he speculates that the route would have been through Stoke and Harptree, then the Roman road running south from Shepton Mallet, and then 8 miles south down to Castle Carey. Now I'll put this route into Google, and that's them to suggest a route, and they came up with something very similar indeed. So I'll reproduce that on the right, but it's not the route the Monarch Way goes. The Monarch's Way carries on due south for quite a long way, goes through Wookey Hole and Wells, and only diverts south when you get to the A37, which is near Castle Carey. Now, what I've done for you here, as a special treat, is a fly-through of the Monarch's Way over the Mendips. So this is travelling at 250 miles an hour, and with a bit of luck, it'll show you everywhere the Monarch's Way goes. Come on. So here we go. We're approaching Compton Martin soon. Well, I think you, Richard, you have a property there, do you? You have woodland you look after.
Yeah, near Ubley actually. It's called Tanya's Wood.
Yeah.
And it's very, very well looked after by our secretary, Judith Tranter, and her husband, David, who's an ANOB volunteer. And they do a sterling job in keeping this place licked into shape. Every now and again, they have a maintenance day or two, and we do things like hedge trimming there, wall building, charcoal burning, all the old country crafts.
Oh, wonderful. Right. Yeah, I think we probably just passed it not so long ago, I guess.
Yep.
Yep, and so on goes the route. So have you walked on many of these places?
I have indeed. Yeah. In fact, our walking group regularly goes over this bit.
Yeah.
Smitham's Hill is the site. See where you are now at East Harttree Woods.
Yeah.
That is the site of an old lead mining at a place called Smitham's Chimley, which the Mendip Society paid a lot of money and time for to put back into good order because it was falling down, and it's now owned by Natural England, or looked after them by them. But a lot of these places, yes, the society has walked round, and it's a wonderful place because it's uphill and down dale,
Yeah.
plenty of trees and woods, and a great variety of countryside, which is obviously quite plain on this wonderful representation. It's far better, more interesting than looking at an Ordnance Survey map, actually.
Yeah.
Love it to bits. Yeah.
Yeah. What's interesting here, you can see how Wells is much lower down than the plateau we're crossing.
Yep, you can almost feel yourself going off the end of any second now, where you've got places like Minories Wood, which are old, and Stock Hill, which are old lead mining areas, and it's absolutely laden with history going back to the Roman times there.
Yeah.
And we're just about to drop off the Mendip Plateau as we come down the hill into Wookey and Wookey Hole.
Yeah. So yeah, this is about a 30-mile, bit short of 30-mile walk. Probably about 25, 26 miles. So it's about 2 days walking.
Mm.
And
You
there
can
we
actually
are.
see the gradient we're going over right now. You know.
Yeah, yeah.
Very interesting.
And there we are, down to the beautiful city of Wells.
Mm.
So yeah, the route goes right in front of the cathedral and around the Bishop's Palace before emerging into the countryside beyond. So yeah, that's it. Okay.
Yep.
Moving on. So this was our Mendip walk. On the left is myself on the rainy day that Richard mentioned, which was 19th of July, just over a year ago. And it was a soaking wet day. The second photograph there was one of the breaks in the rain, but it ended absolutely torrential.
Mm.
It was, would it be the Ring of Bells we had lunch, I think?
Yep, yeah, that sounds right.
Yeah, yeah, that was, yeah, when we got into the pub, it was steaming all over the place.
They're used to walkers down here, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, this was a nicer day when we carried on to Wells itself. I think that's, on the left is coming down off the plateau. That would be Chew Valley Lake, I think.
Yep.
Yeah, and the cathedral. Yep, the compulsory photograph in front of the our destination, which was where we finished for the day, which was Wells Cathedral.
Mm.
That was a lovely walk. So yeah, and this is moving on. This was where the party finished for the night, which was Castle Carey. The most famous landmark in Castle Carey, which you may know, is the one on the left, the Lock-up, which is got a Victorian jailhouse shaped amusingly like a policeman's helmet. On the right is a property called the Old House, just outside Castle Carey, in the Ansford area, where this is where the king probably spent the night, as far as we know, on his way to Trent Manor. And this is Trent Manor itself. As you on the left is a drawing made in the 19th century. This was to become a very important house for the escape. He spent 5 nights here initially. It's now quite a big and plush manor house, but it's been very much built on over the last 100 years and extended. But you'll see it's in private hands. But we are very fortunate to wangle a private visit there. The owner was good enough to let us in. And the central picture there is the priest hole where Charles hid. And on the right is the very same room today with myself posing on top of the hiding place. So Charles had to hide there occasionally when there were troops in the area, but mostly he had a bedroom there and he stayed concealed out of sight for for the entire visit. Now, while he was staying in Trent, Lord Wilmot was busy, and he organised a passage from Charmouth, which is near Lyme Regis, for to try and get him out of the country to France. What he'd arranged with a Captain Ellison, who one of his tenants was called Stephen Limbury, who was a ship owner, and he was sailing for St Malo from Charmouth, and it was arranged that Charles would be on that ship. So on 22nd of September, Charles rode with Wilmot, Swan, and a niece of Lady Wyndham, was called Juliana Collinsby. And the story was that Wilmot and Juliana were an eloping couple, and Charles was pretending to be their servant. So they waited at this place, it's the King's Arms in Charmouth, for Limbury to turn up, but sadly they waited all night and he never came. What seems to have happened is that his wife had become suspicious of his activities, and suspected that he was in fact involved in illegal activities, and locked him in the bedroom in order to prevent him being arrested and him taken away from her. That was one story. Another story is that Limbury had never been paid in the first place by Captain Ellison. But whatever, Charles had a long night waiting at this property you see today on the right, 19th century view on the left, and that's Charmouth, bottom right. He had a long night waiting there and nothing happened. So on the next morning, this is the 23rd of September, Charles and Juliana travelled to Bridport, hoping to revive the plan to leave from the Dorset coast. When they arrived, they discovered that Bridport was full of parliamentary troops who were about to sail to Jersey, where there was still a romp of royalist supporters. So they're hoping to put that rebellion down. Charles and Juliana rode through the soldiers to the George Inn, which today is a charity shop, which you see top right. And they took a private room there. Meanwhile, Wilmot and Swan had stayed behind in Charmouth because Wilmot had discovered his horse had lost a shoe. However, when he tried to, he went to the blacksmith to get it replaced. The blacksmith recognised that one of the shoes on Wilmot's horse had been made in Worcestershire, and that didn't tie with Wilmot's cover story. The blacksmith thought that this may well be connected with the escape of the king, because the country was alive with rumours of where the king had got to. The blacksmith informed an army officer, and he rode out. They found the rest of the party gone to Bridport, so the army officer rode out there with troops in pursuit. So meanwhile, Wilmot had set off himself, aware that the game could be up. He got word to Charles and that they were to meet outside on the outskirts of Bridport. When they met, they rapidly took a decision to head off back to Trent again. And in order to try and find their way, they set off down a very small road called Lee Lane. And about 1 minute after they did so, all the troops rode past, and so it was literally a minute the wrong way, and they would have all been captured. And on the bottom right, there is a stone is erected to commemorate Charles's very narrow escape from the troops there. So after leaving Bridport, Charles and Wilmot lost their way again, and they ended up, after half a day's riding, in this village called Broad Windsor. And they took rooms in the attic of the George Inn. And this was another rainy day, and behind the two of us you see the property, which is today incorporates some remnant of the George Inn, and there's a plaque on the wall there. Later that night, there were still more adventures that day, because later that night the local constable arrived with 40 soldiers. Again, they were en route to Jersey, and they were being billeted at Broad Windsor. The story is that one of the women who was travelling with the soldiers was pregnant and went into labour. and the locals were feared very much that this woman and the child were going to be left behind, and it was the parish that would be forced to pay for its upbringing. So there was a continual uproar over this incident throughout the night, and Charles and his party were able to lay low and avoid detection. Now the view on the centre, the broad view going across, it was one of the loveliest views I've ever seen. Really, it doesn't quite come through in the photograph, but beyond the hills you can see the sea, and in the valley you can see a farm and the Dorset countryside and sheep moving around. And Thomas Hardy's presence was very much there on that particular day. So, now, the next day, the soldiers left Broad Windsor at dawn, and the party were able to return to Trent. And so that was a relatively uneventful day, and it was here that Charles settled down until 5th of October, while Wilmot went about making more plans for the escape. Now, this property is a fulcrum of this escape, really. He spent more time here than anywhere else. Well, Boscobel is the more famous house. This really is the very heart of the whole adventure. He eventually left on 5th of October. The lady who, the proprietress of the house, Mrs. Anne Wyndham, she recorded in her diary that on the day he left, she said, "Thus His Sacred Majesty bade farewell to Trent, the ark in which God had shut him up when the floods of rebellion had covered his dominions," which I think is really a very, very moving quote, and says a lot about the part this house played in its tale. And the room on the extreme right here, I think that is where Charles actually stayed, and that was where that contained the priest hole you saw earlier. And on the right is the church, which is just by the manor house. So eventually, after several days plotting, the plan was formed to leave from the south-east coast. Charles was now moved on to another safe house, which is this one here, Heel House, which is near Salisbury. Arrangements had been made with someone called Captain Nicholas Tattersall to carry Charles and Wilmot from Shoreham near Brighton in a coal boat, which was called the Surprise. So the early hours of 13th of October, Charles and his companion rode to Hambledon, where another supporter lived, and they spent the night there. The next day, they rode on to the fishing village of Brighthelmstone, which is now called Brighton, which is 50 yards away. They had to pass troops on the way, but they ended up meeting at another inn, again called the Georgian, in Brighton on 14th of October with Tattersall. When Tattersall arrived, he hadn't been told what the mission was, but when he saw him, he recognised him, and he suddenly got frightened about the dangerous nature of the undertaking. He was so horrified. His reaction drew the attention of the innkeeper, who'd once been a servant in the royal household, and he recognised Charles as well. But the innkeeper fell on his knees before Charles, who himself recognised his former servant. Charles' reaction was to smile and move away. And he said to Gunter, who he was with, "The fellow knows me and I him. I hope he is a honest fellow." Meanwhile, Captain Tattersall had decided to take advantage of the dangerous situation, and he demanded an extra fee as danger money. Once this was agreed, he pledged himself to Charles' service. Charles rested briefly on the night of 14th of October, and he set out from Brighton to Charmouth just before midnight. So at 2 a.m. on 15th of October, Charles and Wilmot boarded the Surprise, but had to wait 5 hours before high tide, and then they sailed first to the Isle of Wight, then they changed course, carried on through the night, and ended up at the French coastal town of Fécamp. On the morning of 16th of October, 1651, Charles landed in France to begin his exile, and this is a tremendous drawing here of Shoreham as it was then. It was drawn only a couple of years before 1651, so it's very much the scene you would see. On the boat on the left is a it was a painting in the 18th century of the Surprise, so that is supposed to be the vessel itself that's represented, and the church you see in the middle of the drawing is still there to this day. So the day after landing, Charles went to Rouen and then to Paris to stay with his mother, Queen Henrietta Maria, for 9 years. When Cromwell died in 1658, there was 2 years of political confusion, and that led to the restoration of the monarchy in 1660. When he returned to England as king, Charles granted various annuities and gifts to those who'd assisted in the escape. Jane Lane and the Penderyn brothers, who you remember, came in at Boscobel and at Bristol. They were granted pensions in perpetuity, and the Penderyn's pensions is still being paid to their descendants to this day. I think they get something like £2 each or something. There's about 1,000 of them, but they're all very proud of it. And the king himself, he dined out on stories of the escape for the rest of his life. And it reflects the ironic possibility that in some ways his days on the run were the freest and happiest he'd ever known. He was looking after himself, and he was taking responsibility for his own life in a way that's never quite possible again. In 1664, the King's birthday, 29th of May, was designated Oak Apple Day by an Act of Parliament, and a special service was inserted in the Book of Common Prayer. And the oak apple, of course, recollecting the oak tree. And for over 200 years, the King's birthday was celebrated by the wearing of a sprig of oak leaves in remembrance of the events. So that was the story. I've only really mentioned a few of the events here. You know, if you want to find out more, there are details on my website, which is called thefugitiveking.uk. Also, there's a recently published book called Charles II is Escape into Exile, which is excellent. And I hope too that you'll be inspired to explore the monarch's way in rather more detail. Yeah. And so I think I've unmuted you mostly now. So
thank you very much.
Any questions? Yeah.
Yeah, thank you very much. Most intriguing. Now, normal thing now, questions and answers. Has anybody got any questions relating to that? Director John, fire away if you have.
Yes, I have one. Could you put the map up again and show us where Trent is in relation to the rest of the journey?
So you like me to put the map up?
To see where Trent is, yes, because you mentioned
Trent. Okay, yep, certainly.
That's it.
I expect that's it. I think that is.
Can you see that?
Yeah.
I can't. No, I haven't got a map up yet. No.
No, I mean, you.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Trent. Can you see the map there?
No, it's still not up on my screen.
Okay. One moment then. Right. How am I doing?
Oh,
Yeah.
Good.
I was going to use
oh, I
that.
see.
Yep.
Yes.
Yep. Right. So
Yeah.
Trent is.
I mean, that's an incredible journey.
Yeah. Trent is where the yellow line and the brown line intersect.
Yes. I've got it now.
So it's just south of South Cadbury,
Right, got it.
north of Yeovil.
Right.
Yeah, I mean it's only a tiny village, but the church is fascinating, and the manor house is just about 100 yards from the church. Okay. Okay. Yep. Is there anything else anyone would like to ask?
Put your hand up.
Yeah, you can just start talking if you like.
Okay, how is it that you know all these details of the name?
So, I mean, Potter, how do I know all these details?
A lot of research, I think, John.
Yeah, well, an awful lot is known about it because so many of the participants, wrote up their own accounts of it, which compared with most historical events, there is a massive information. There's this book here, which essentially consists of the various diaries and memoirs that people produced connected with the escape. Most notable of all, the king himself dictated his recollections to Samuel Pepys, and that runs to about a 40 or 50-page document. So you've actually got the king's own memories of it. And in addition to that, anybody who was involved to any length at all seems to have had their diaries published one way or another. So, and there have been several books written of it. This was the one I mentioned was the Flight of the King. That was published in the 19th century. That's a fantastic source for tracing all the buildings and the houses and that kind of thing, and the route he took. And of course, there are the three books of the walk, which published by the Monarch's Way Society, and they include quite a lot of bits and pieces as well, little asides here and there. So
interesting research.
Yeah, it's.
So how many more miles have you got to do?
A bit less. I think it's about 180, something like that. Yeah, I mean, I think I said to you we'd hoped to finish on the 370th anniversary of the day that Charles actually left the country, and we were building up to that. But I mean, that's all gone now, I'm afraid. It'll probably be the 371st anniversary.
Anybody, if people are interested, but the last photograph, with the little church in the middle of it, John knows this because I told him. Yeah. That's where David and I got married.
Yeah, so I'll just put that on.
Is there a blue plaque to that?
Oh yes, yeah, we've definitely got a plaque of our own on the wall.
Yeah, I'll just.
Could I ask a question, please?
Yeah. There's the church in question. Yes, of course. Yes.
Is it all on paths, or is there some of it on roads that you have to walk?
Yes, some of it is on roads, but not really very much. I would say, I don't know, 85–90% on paths, something like that.
That's good.
Yeah, I mean, when you start approaching towns, you're more likely to have to walk on footpaths and things, but tarmac footpaths, that is.
Yes.
But I can't think there wouldn't be many dangerous country lanes or anything like that. It's all pretty well thought out.
Can you tell me where Norton Court was?
Yeah, just.
I know Abbottsley.
Yeah. Oh, well, Norton Court is just about half a mile outside Abbottsley. You're going along
on the Bristol side?
Yes, on the Bristol side. No, on the you go to Abbottsley, you go to the church at Abbottsley, and then it's just half a mile from that. There's a garden centre just outside Abbottsley.
Oh, by Lee Court.
Yes, that's right. Yeah. And I think, in fact, the old Norton Court is no more than half a mile from Lee Court. I think that Lee Court essentially replaced the old place. I think that it was the same family that built it. They just built something a little bit away.
Can I ask a question, please?
Yes, something. Yeah.
Yes. Will this be available online at all for a while, or is this it?
Well, I've recorded it, so I'll when I get around to it, I will put it on YouTube if you like.
Excellent.
Excellent, thank you. Because there's one or two friends who would be interested who couldn't watch today.
Oh, very good. Yeah, I'll do that with pleasure.
I'd like to ask a question, John. What can you tell us about the Monarch's Way Society? What is that?
Well, it was.
Do you want me to tell him, John? Do you want me to tell him?
Yeah.
John, do you want me to tell him?
By all means. Someone else would like to add to that. Yeah. Oh, it's JP.
I'm the chairman of the Monarch's Way Association.
No, I didn't recognise you there, John.
Oh well,
Welcome.
my hair's a bit long, John. I've been in lockdown for several months.
Oh well, yeah.
No haircut since February.
Yeah. Right. So, yeah, would you like to expound on the Monarch's Way? John?
Well, basically, the Monarch's Way Association was set up by somebody called Trevor Antill around about 1992, running into about 1995 when he actually started to persuade local rights of way to allow him to waymark the route. At the moment, the association has about 1,100 members, and every 6 months we send out a newsletter. It's coming up to September, so I'm getting ready with that. And at the moment, we have a group of walkers that have associated with Country Walking magazine, and they're walking the whole of the route with a baton, and they're passing the baton from section to section to sort of follow the route. And at the moment, they're walking tomorrow from Keynsham to Abbotsleigh. And then on Sunday, they'll be walking from Abbotsleigh onwards. And then later in the month, we have an ultra runner called Vicky Owens, and she is going to try and run the route continuously. And she's aiming for a time of the whole of the route to somewhere in the region of about 16 days. The record to do the whole route is held by somebody called Lee Stewart Evans, who did it in absolutely horrendous conditions a couple of years ago in April, where there was massive flooding. He was wading through 2 feet, 3 feet, 4 feet of water, and it took him about 16 and a half days. But Vicky Evans was gonna try and do it earlier in the year in June, but obviously with lockdown that's put paid to that. But she's going to try and set off towards the end of August, and the target time is about 16 days. While she was on lockdown, she did a training session just to see how far she could go in one day, and she did 69 miles.
Wow.
God.
Something else, isn't it?
Yeah. That is incredible. Yeah. Anyway. So.
I don't know if anybody's got any more questions they want to ask me. I don't want to stand on John's toes. The only comment I would make about Cromwell, there's a lot of suspicion about the rapid rate at which Cromwell passed away, and there is a thought that Cromwell was actually poisoned because he'd upset people that were his backers, and that's why he suddenly disappeared. His son Richard, we wanted his son Richard Cromwell to take over, sort of like a family dynasty, but Richard Cromwell didn't want any of that, and he went into isolation, which left the opportunity for King Charles to come back again. But there is a theory, quite a strong theory, that Oliver Cromwell was poisoned at the end, because if you think about it, it was pretty puritanical. There was no church services much. There was no pubs, no drinking, no merrymaking. In fact, a lot of Cromwell's forces desecrated a lot of churches because he didn't like the human form in any of the churches. And I've seen some horrendously terrible desecrations of 14th century things in churches where the Cromwellian troops have scratched the faces off the
yeah. Some of those were Thomas Cromwell's troops, but
sorry?
Some of those were Thomas Cromwell's troops. Actually.
Oh, were they?
Yeah. Is there any more?
Yes, John. What sort of mileage were you doing, generally speaking, on average? About 10 miles, 12 miles?
10 to 12, that kind of thing, yeah. I mean, I think it depends really on how you're setting the day off. If there's a lot of driving at the end of the day and driving at the end of the day, more to be 10 miles. Though where we've got to now, we tend to be stopping away in hotels. And that gives you the chance to do a little bit more.
Sounds
So
sensible.
yeah, maybe 12, 13 miles those kind of days.
Okay.
Decent distance.
Mm,
Yeah, obviously.
brilliant. Thank you very much for the 2 Johns. You know.
Yep. Okay. Yeah. Thanks, JT, for your contribution.
That's all right. My pleasure, John.
Yeah, fantastic. Anybody else got anything they'd like to ask? No.
Okay. So you.
Can we do that?
Yeah, of course you can.
Always have a round of applause for us.
There you go.
Right.
Thank you for Fugitive.
Well, thank
Do
you.
we get tea and biscuits now?
Okay. Right. So, do you want me to close down now?
Well, I just have one last word, John, then you can do the close.
Yeah.
As promised, this isn't the be-all and end-all of this particular subject. John, I do believe that you are willing to come back to our normal venue at Winscombe and do it face-to-face.
Well, if you can stand it, yeah.
Yeah, that's okay. Well, when all this COVID nonsense dies down a bit and we can get back to normal, I will be on the phone to you to rebook your visit to Winscombe, okay?
Okay, righto, thank you.
There we go. Over to you to close off. Thank you very much indeed for coming.
Well, thank you very much indeed for your attendance and for bearing with me. I hope it's proved fruitful. I think it's been worth doing, and I hope you will seek out the Monarch's Way and do some walking along it yourselves. So, again, thank you all very much indeed.
Thank you.
Thank you, John.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.